Hello, welcome to Zero Tackle TV. Today we are previewing Game 2 of State of Origin, Blues vs Maroons, MCG, Wednesday night. And to do that for me is Mr. Scott Pryde, the Zero Tackle NRL Chief Editor. How are you, mate?
Good, Phoenix. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. So let's get straight into it. So obviously no one could really predict how Game 1 would go, given the way it played out with the Blues reduced to 12 people. 12 players, with Reece Walsh getting that huge hit in the first 7 minutes. So do the Blues actually have what it takes to get over the line in this series, or was the final scoreline in Game 1 a fair reflection of the difference between those two sides?
Well, it's a good question because, you come into Game 2 and it's almost like we haven't really seen these two teams at full capacity yet. Obviously, a lot of injuries coming into the series hasn't helped either, but that doesn't really clean up for Game 2. So it is that focus on whether the Blues actually do have enough in the tank or enough in their side, enough in their tactics, enough in their strategies to actually turn this around after a very disappointing Game 1. There's no way around it. When you lose a guy 8 minutes in, particularly a debutant, and a guy in an outside back position with no replacement for him on the interchange bench, that game was over 10 minutes in. You knew which way it was going. I started writing my match report, full disclosure. There was really no way back for the Blues. But you came into the series thinking it was going to be quite a close series. Obviously, the injuries to both sides did make things hard to predict and hard to read. Debutants on both sides and all the rest of it. A new coach for the Blues as well. What you did see out of Game 1 was a Blues side that had a lot more to them than last year. They played hard. They fought the whole way. They stayed in that game when they probably didn't have a right to. Part of that is on Queensland, and we'll talk about that in a little while as well. But the Blues did show something. They showed what they didn't show under Brad Fittler in the last 2 years, which was that real desire to fight for the jersey, to fight for the state, to fight for your fans who are there. And, it was a big crowd at Homebush. Unfortunately, again, that game was over so early in the piece. But, the Blues do have enough to go with the Maroons. I'm not sure if the scoreline from Game 1 was a fair reflection of actually the way that game played out, given the way the Blues fought and kicked and scratched. 38-10 probably wasn't overly fair on New South Wales. The question now is, do they go into this series with any chance of salvaging anything? They can force a decider, absolutely. They'll need to be a lot better. There's no doubt about that. And then go to Brisbane and win. That's as tough as it gets. But, the first step, they have to break it down, do it one step at a time. They have to win in Melbourne to begin with. They can, absolutely. It just comes down to whether, they've made the right changes, whether they come into Game 2 with the same attitude as Game 1, because I think a lot of that performance in Game 1 was about attitude. So again, I don't think the scoreline was a fair reflection of the difference between the two states. Queensland, absolutely the better team on the day. But, Game 2 could set up anything.
Yeah, so, despite playing with child, they clearly had those issues in Game 1. So apart from attitude, what is it specifically that they need to do better coming into that game in Melbourne?
Well, not get a bloke sent off 8 minutes in would be a good start.
That'll be helpful.
But, despite playing with 12, the Blues actually had the ascendancy of that game at various points, particularly early in the second half. I thought at times there, you always had in the back of your mind, look, fatigue's going to get them, that Queensland will score late points, and they were coming from behind at halftime. So to win Game 1 would have been a miracle, and it was realistically never going to happen. But despite that, the Blues, as I said, did have some ascendancy there in the second half. The big issue for mine was their attack. Yes, they were down a man, and it's always harder to attack down a man. However, teams train for that now. Sin bins and send-offs are more and more regular in the modern game. Not send-offs so much, but particularly sin bins. You see a lot of them. And teams do train for it. And you can see that because often we'll get a sin bin in the NRL and a team will manage to put points on with 12 players on the park or put pressure on or whatever it is. The Blues did neither of those things. They turned the ball over. Their fifth tackle options were really, really poor. And again, yes, having 12 and a rookie halfback does rock your confidence. And, poor Nico Hines, he had to be dropped, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But, playing with 12 does rock your confidence, but they need to be better because some of those fifth tackle options were among the worst you're ever going to see. In fact, one of them in particular, about 60th minute, I would credit with putting Queensland on the run that ended up kicking the scoreboard to where it finished up, which, again, I don't think was an overly fair reflection on the Blues, but one of those fifth tackle options literally turned the ball over in the wrong spot. Queensland went up the other end, scored straight away, and that was all she wrote. So fifth tackle options are going to be massive for the Blues. hopefully they've done plenty in training this week to address that issue. Obviously, Jerome Luai's still there. Mitchell Moses comes in. As I said, we'll get changes in a minute. But, I think fifth tackle options are the big one. And then, playing out the 80 minutes, again, hard to read from game one because you're only playing with 12. But playing out that 80 minutes, because we know Queensland will. Queensland under Billy Slater, in all 7 games Billy Slater has coached so far, they play out the 80 minutes. Doesn't matter if their attack's off for a period of the game or they let in points or whatever it is, they'll keep kicking, fighting, scratching all the way to the end. And that's something the Blues are going to have to do in spades if they want to level this series down in Melbourne.
Yep, absolutely. So let's take a look at the teams. As you mentioned, Nicho Hynes getting dropped. There's plenty of other big changes for the Blues ahead of game 2. So has Michael Maguire got it right?
Well, it's tough to say. I think the Blues side looks better balanced than game 1. The 5 changes, obviously, you've got Mitchell Moses in for Nicho Hynes, which had to happen. I just talked about. Unfortunately, Hynes, he looked like a deer in the headlights in game 1. His kicking game was, very poor. His involvement just wasn't there. Moses does have some Origin runs on the board. His form at club level has been but he's been coming back from an injury as well. So, the change had to be made one way or another. You probably couldn't run Hynes again. I get why it's happened. It does blow up your week and a half at camp in game 1 where you've been training and working on it, but that working on it did nothing in game 1. So, probably Maguire's decided that it's worth that risk to blow it up and start again. Obviously, Dylan Edwards comes in for James Tedesco at fullback. Edwards was picked for game 1. You probably couldn't leave him out. I thought Tedesco was actually quite good in game 1 and he brings a lot of experience to the Blues side. But on the balance of things, you probably couldn't leave Edwards out after picking him originally for game 1 if he's fit and firing. Obviously, if there's any problems there, Tedesco will come straight back into the side. The big change for me is Cam Murray in for Cameron McInnes. We saw what Murray is able to bring this Blues side last year. He is outstanding. Got the start in game 3 last year and the Blues looked a different side because of it. I wouldn't stop short of saying he's the best lock forward in the competition. And so, he absolutely had to be picked despite the fact he's only played like half an NRL game since coming back from injury. McInnes, probably unlucky to miss out. He's a workhorse and I've said it before and I'll say it again. Like if he was a Queenslander, McInnes has probably played 15 Origins. They pick players like McInnes. The Blues generally don't. But he was the unlucky man, I suppose, this time. And then, of course, Connor Watson in for Hudson Young. Balances the Blues bench so much better. We're going to talk about Watson in just a minute, I think, but it just balances that Blues bench a lot better. Young is probably the unlucky one. We saw Ricky Stewart blow up about this yesterday in the press saying, why pick him if you're only going to drop him after 20 minutes on the field? I get where Ricky Stewart's coming from, but someone had to be dropped from that bench because the balance was all wrong. Young was the unlucky man out. You can cover the second row a lot more effectively than you can cover the middle third. And then, of course, Joseph Suaalii, he's out, suspended. In comes Latrell Mitchell. Again, a big call from Michael Maguire. Latrell has spent a lot of the season injured so far, but the last couple of weeks, he has played excellent rugby league. Last time he played Origin in 2021, he was a game breaker for the Blues. He and Tom Trebojevic basically won that series single-handedly for New South Wales. And the Blues have missed him for what it's worth in the last 2 and a bit years that he hasn't been available for Origin due to injury and whatever else has happened in Latrell's, journey. So he had to come in. Bradman Best was the other option, but I think Michael Maguire has got that one right. Whether the changes work holistically, I think a lot of water to pass under the bridge there, and 5 changes from Origin 1 to 2 is a large amount of changes, but I think each of them, when you break them down, makes sense.
Yeah, it is a lot of changes, but I guess you mentioned before, but as a Blues man, are you happy with Connor Watson on the bench? Is he the right man for the job?
Yeah, well, Connor Watson was in my team before game 1. Unfortunately, he copped an injury essentially on the eve of selection, which ruled him out. And, Watson's had a horror run of injuries over the last 2 years. So fingers crossed he doesn't cop an injury when he comes onto the field in game 2, because the Blues are going to need him to play a role. Where Watson brings a difference that the Blues didn't have in game 1 is he can just fill so many positions. He will undoubtedly spend time at hooker to give Reece Robson a break, which is a luxury the Blues didn't have in game 1. He can also play lock, but any of those backline positions, I'd be comfortable with Watson lining up anywhere from halves to fullback into the centres if you needed him to. He's proven to be that real utility for the clubs he's played for, Roosters currently and Newcastle before that. It's a real story, kind of Watson, because, he was, for everything that was said, he was off to the Super League. He was done in the NRL 2 years ago. No one wanted him. And then he got on the phone to Trent Robinson and he's now an Origin player. So it's an excellent story. I hope he has a great performance on Wednesday night. He's the sort of player that has Origin written all over him, to be perfectly honest. I think he'll do a job for the Blues. And as I said, it balances the team so much better when you can put a player like Connor Watson on that bench. We saw in game one when Suoli'i got sent off, the Blues really lacked in their outside backs and didn't have that coverage. So I think Watson will come in both with a plan A and a plan B, and that will make the Blues a far better football side.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so looking over at the Maroons side of things, so they've dropped Selwyn Cobbo. Do you think that's a bit of a risk?
Well, yeah, it absolutely is. Cobbo was excellent in game one. I questioned his selection, full disclosure, leading into game one. I really didn't understand him being on the bench. I understood, I suppose, where Billy Slater was coming from, in that Queensland have had a real horror run with the outside backs being injured in recent years, in game one or two or three or whatever game of Origin it is. Queensland just didn't seem to be able to take a trick when it came to their starting outside backs. So I understood Selwyn Cobbo being on the bench from that point of view, but I did question his selection from the fact that it just left the Maroons a little undersized. But he had a wonderful performance, came on there in the 8th minute, played in the centres and really did a job for Queensland. Billy Slater has come out and basically said it's a mix of the fact that he's not quite 100% fit and that his form, he's got issues in his game that he needs to work on. But I feel like it works so well for game one, even if he's not quite 100%. And I think it's more down to form than fitness, to be honest, because a 10-day Origin camp, realistically, if you're only battling a niggle, should be enough to get right to go. I feel like it's down to form more than fitness, and it is a massive risk because now Queensland come into this game, they've picked Felice Kafusi and Kurt Capewell on the bench. So, two edge forwards there. There's, we're going to get into it shortly, I think, but there's not a lot of size there. And there's no coverage for the outside backs. Yes, Kurt Capewell can play in the centres, and he's done that job previously for Queensland before very well, I might add. He's the sort of player that just bleeds Queensland and will get the job done. To be fair, and I've read it, I've said it, you could put a Queensland jersey on a chest of drawers and they'd probably still go pretty well. But Capewell is not a specialist in the outside backs. He is not Selwyn Cobbo, and his form has been poor. He's been injured. Big risk, massive risk.
Yeah. So as you were saying, like looking at that middle third for the Maroons, could they be rolled through there, or do they have enough in that engine room?
Well, it's a big question because I questioned it coming into game one, and now they're even smaller. Obviously, not ideal having Jermaine Hopgood go down with a back injury. I think he would have been a walk-up selection again for game two. Did his job in game one. No issues. But they're coming to game two now with, one middle forward on the bench being Mo Fotuaika. He's going to have to back up the three starters being Lindsay Collins, Ruben Cotter and Patrick Carrigan. Of course, again, the Maroons have so many injuries in the middle third. It's very hard to pick a team. But that bench looks criminally undersized to me. Felice Kafusi and Kurt Capewell come in, as I just said. If there's no injuries in the outside backs, Kurt Capewell is likely going to have to spend time in the middle third, which, if I'm a Maroons fan, that scares me, because one of the big issues in game one for Queensland, in fact, was their dominance of that middle third. Even against 12, they did at times get rolled. They were on the back foot defending their own line, and you shouldn't be doing that against 12 blokes for 72 minutes. So if they already struggled in that component and then you take away one of the players in that middle third group, I think there's a big concern there for Queensland. I think the other thing is if one of those starting middles goes down with an injury or a HIA, like it can happen, you see concussions weekly. But if one of those middles goes down with a HIA, particularly Cotter or Carrigan, who are going to have to play massive minutes in this game, I don't really know where the minutes come from for Queensland. Does Felice Kafusi shift into the middle? Potentially, like it might have to happen. If I'm a Queensland fan, do I want to watch Felice Kafusi or Kurt Capewell running around in the middle third? No, not really. So, there is a real risk there for Queensland that they do end up on the back foot up the middle. That said, the three guys they have starting there are all big minute players and all very, very strong, among the best middles in the competition. If the plan works and there's no injuries, they're probably okay. But if there's an injury, gee.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do, given that they're coming up against a 13-man Blues this time, most likely, save for anything crazy happening in the first 7 minutes again, is there anything that Queensland especially do need to improve on from game one?
Yeah, 100% ball control. They were, as I said, they were very ordinary at times in attack in game one. They struggled to ram home the advantage of having an extra man on the field. They attacked. It was clunky. That's the only word I can use to describe it. They really struggled to put the Blues away. And that is weird when you've got a team being led around by Daly Cherry Evans and to be honest, Cherry Evans had a good game. But things just didn't look quite as well structured. The execution of some of the plays wasn't there. And granted, in game one of State of Origin, that can happen. Like, you got a team that hasn't played together for 12 months and all of a sudden they've got to, try and find that execution again. And don't underestimate the role that Cameron Munster normally plays in that. He's obviously out injured for the Maroons. Reece Walsh also going off early didn't help. But that said, against 12, there's enough talent in that side that they should have been a lot better with their execution. So they're going to have to fix that. Their middle third, as we just talked about, they're going to have to be stronger there in terms of getting up the other end of the park, because against 13 and with hope, from a Blues point of view, hopefully more of a well-organised attack and hopefully Mitchell Moses plays far better than Nicho Hynes did from a Blues point of view. If that happens, Queensland are going to need to be better if they want to take this series out in straight sets. Otherwise, we're off to Brisbane for a decider.
Yep. So, of course, Game 2 is going to be played at the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and not your normal rugby league ground, it's fair to say. So how do you think that's going to impact the way things play out?
Well, it's interesting when rugby league gets played on cricket grounds because it's not that traditional rectangle shape that you see. There's a lot more open space. Players find themselves sort of losing where they are on the field at times. We saw, I think the biggest example of this, the Sydney Roosters were forced to play out of the Sydney Cricket Ground for a number of years while Allianz Stadium was being redone here in Sydney. And they turned that place into a fortress because they trained there, they understood it, they understood the dimensions of the ground, what they were looking at, where, the fact that that fence over there is not the sideline, it's 30 metres away from the sideline. And that's a very hard thing to do when you're coming into it as a one-off, whereas the Roosters, as I said, they were dominant during that period. I don't think their team's that much better than it is now, but they were able to turn that place into a fortress. So both teams come into this with, I guess, not as much experience playing on these oval grounds. And for that reason, I actually question the decision to drop James Tedesco for Game 2. He was part of that Roosters side and probably has a lot more experience on these type of grounds. What will it mean? It'll mean the kicking games become super, super important because, again, kickers are the players who can probably get impacted most by that oval ground. You're not really quite 100% sure what you're looking at when you kick the football. So whoever steps up and manages the kicking game better is probably going to have a big say on the game, just based on the ground. As will the back three, fielding those kicks, running it back, getting sets onto a good start. I think Queensland probably have an advantage based on that, purely because Cherry Evans has more experience. He's played 300 plus NRL games. So he probably comes in with the MCG experience. He's also played at the MCG before. He's not the only player that's played at the MCG before, but I do think Queensland take the advantage just based on that.
Yeah, and I think the Victorian crowd also tends to lean a little bit more towards Queensland, which is interesting, but they are a little bit further around.
Because it does. If there's one group of people New South Welshmen hate more than Queenslanders, it's Victorians. So, the crowd will certainly skew towards the Maroons.
Oh, yeah, I can tell you from experience that is true. So, time to make some big calls for Game 2. So, where do you think the game will be won and lost?
Well, hopefully not on a send-off. I would suggest that, again, a bit like Game 1, it's going to be won on yardage, territory, possession. doing the little things right, because I think it'll be a lot closer than game one. I think, well, provided, again, that we have 13 on 13. I think it'll be a lot closer. I think it'll be really one up the middle. And for that reason, I think the Blues take a bit of an advantage there. Again, we talked about Queensland's middle third being a little undersized, a little under strength. So I think the Blues take an advantage on that front. However, I think Reece Walsh being back fit will make a big difference to Queensland's attack. He's an absolute star. And, you know, from a run meters point of view, he and Hamisa Tabuai-Fidow and Selwyn Cobbo, well, Selwyn Cobbo's out, mind you, but, you know, that Queensland back five, Murray Taulagi, they all run the ball really strongly. So I think for Queensland's point of view, they are going to need to take the pressure off their forwards by leading with their back five. And I think the other question around this game is Latrell Mitchell's performance. He could be a game breaker, a bit of an X factor for the Blues. If he's that, New South Wales probably become favourites. If Latrell has one of his performances where he looks like he doesn't want to be there, Queensland suddenly probably run away with it. So, yeah, a lot hinges on Latrell, a lot hinges on Reece Walsh and the back five for each state.
Yeah, absolutely. So, straight up predictions, first try scorer, man of the match, and who's your winner?
Yeah, so I've been umming and ahhing about this, but I'm going to take Latrell for first try scorer. I think he will start the game strongly. I don't know if he'll finish the game strongly, but I think he'll start strongly, so I'm going to take him for first try scorer. Man of the match, I am going to go Dylan Edwards. I think he will have a huge say on things from the back. And yes, that does mean I'm tipping the Blues by 4.
Interesting. All right. I'm only predicting winner, and I think it's just going to be Queensland in straight sets, unfortunately for you, mate. So, but thank you for breaking this all down, for previewing Origin Game 2 Wednesday night. There's going to be a lot of coverage on Zero Tackle, yes?
Absolutely. We've got everything coming your way in the next 48 hours ahead of the game, previews and predictions and all that jazz. And then we'll be live during the game and plenty of content coming out after it, including our review Phoenix.
Yeah, another long night for you ahead and another exciting time ahead for the State of Origin lovers out there. Thank you, Scott, for breaking down the Game 2 Origin preview. Don't forget, you can catch all the NRL news at zerotackle.com.